At least three people, including a 4-year-old child, have been killed in Russian strikes on Ukraine overnight. Strikes on Kiev left at least one person dead, while another person died in the western region of Khmelnytsky. Emergency services said a young child died in Ukraine's northwestern Zhytomyr region. And in southern Odessa, meanwhile, fresh strikes sparked fires, though no injuries were reported. Ukrainian authorities say recent Russian attacks on the Black Sea city is an attempt to completely destroy maritime logistics. Well, to talk more about the situation in Ukraine, I'm joined on set by our international affairs editor, Douglas Herbert.
Morning, Karis.
Hi, Doug. Why then do we see Russia stepping up its attacks on Odessa, and how do these assaults fit into the Kremlin strategy?
Yeah, to the broader strategy. Well, first of all, as you correctly said, maritime logistics. I'll translate that in layman's terms. Basically, Russia is trying to block Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. Why is it doing that? Well, Russia says it's in retaliation for Ukraine's use of drones to target Russian tankers, oil tankers, in what is essentially Russia's shadow fleet. That is a fleet of essentially illegal recommissioned oil tankers that Russia uses in order to get around to circumvent the sanctions imposed on its energy industry, its oil and gas industry. So yes, Ukraine has been targeting these tankers, calling them legitimate military targets because, by definition, they are literally fueling Russia's war machine. So in response, yeah, Russia's stepping up its attacks on Odessa, the port of Odessa, the region around Odessa. Odessa being obviously the third largest city in Ukraine after Kiev and Kharkiv. But let's be clear here, Karis. While this is a headline this morning, these horrific attacks, Odessa has been under Russian drone attack from the day one of this war, from February 24th, 2022. Odessa, and we were talking about it a lot early in the war. This is not some new theater of war opening up. The reason, though, that it's being multiplied now is, yeah, Russia does feel more and more, even if it doesn't publicly and explicitly say so, it knows that these attacks against its tankers are a threat. It knows that Odessa has been one of the few ports through which ships have been able to go through a narrow corridor under what had been an international agreement to get supplies going along the border, Bulgaria and Romanian borders, a very narrow corridor there, all the way to Turkey. This is an operative port. Remember, Ukraine's other once viable ports, Mykolaiv and others, are now in Russian-occupied hands. So Odessa's the one big remaining viable port. It is not just strategically important, but just also important in general. Odessa also has, I'll say, symbolic and cultural value because some of the targets that have been hit throughout this war by Russia are UNESCO patrimony, cultural landmarks, in addition to residential buildings. Yes, I know the line from Russia is that they do not target civilian infrastructure. They do not target civilians. But the fact of the matter is, time and again, civilian infrastructure and residential buildings have been targeted. In this case, yes, it's a headline that this is a latest and escalating attack on Odessa, but this is part of a continuing story. And I will just say it comes at a time when, as we were talking about yesterday, we've seen the front lines, in a sense, not shifting, but Russia trying to present an image of moving on other fronts, including the international border with Ukraine in the north, into the Kharkiv regions, which you can see. You can't see it on the map, but it's to the east, northeast of Kiev, and Sumy, right next to Kharkiv as well, moving into those areas to try to project this message to the West that Ukraine's front lines are collapsing, when in fact military experts say they are not.
Well, Vladimir Putin says that Russian military victory is inevitable. Many experts would beg to differ. So is the Kremlin's talk of an inevitable victory a false narrative?
There are two questions in there, Karis. In a sense, does Putin believe that a military victory is inevitable? And a lot is to suggest that, yes, he does, just by virtue of what is his explicit worldview is that. He believes that Ukraine is an illegitimate state and that its backers, namely Europe and the West, are weak and indecisive and decadent, and that they cannot hold their own against a glorious superpower such as Russia. They are bound to lose. That is just hardwired into Putin's worldview, not because I'm saying it, because Putin says it time and again over the past quarter of a century. But what's more interesting here, and perhaps it doesn't fully answer your question, is when he speaks of a military victory as being inevitable, and as you correctly said, Western experts begging to differ, they say actually it isn't. Ukraine is more than holding its own. he is perhaps privy to false information. The Institute for the Study of War, which tracks this war battlefield logistics day by day, very minutely, meticulously, says that there's a culture right now in Putin's Russia and the Kremlin of military officials who pay fealty, who are beholden to Putin, as anyone in that presidential administration is, of lying to him, essentially, feeding him misleading or false information about the extent of Russia's battlefield successes. So Putin may very well have a sort of skewed image of what the real battlefield situation is. You'd say, how's that possible? He's the president. He has access to all information, but his information is only as good as what he's given by his top military officers. I will just leave the viewers with the thought that while he gets bad military information, indications that he does get better economic information. And a lot of his top confidants are reportedly telling him that the Russian economy ain't doing so well, and he better keep his eye on it, and he cannot afford to step up and prolong this war.
All right, Doug Herbert, thank you very much for your analysis.